We don't enter design awards. If all of our competitors are talking about being award-winning, not caring about awards actually stands as apart.
You've worked with, I would say, all of the major food and drink brands from Pepsi to Cadbury's. What do you think you're doing differently that allows you to get these kind of clients?
Quite often, I think agencies really want to put their stamp on a piece of work. We are all about what does this mean for the consumer. Fear of failure is so crippling for people that they want to have absolute confidence before embarking on any business activity that it's going to succeed. Well, you can't. My original aim was to convert my garage and employ an art worker, and we'd be a team of 3. And then very soon afterwards, I'm looking at the work outputted from some of the biggest names in the industry thinking we could do better than that.
If you had everything stripped from you and you had to start from scratch, how do you think you would approach business development?
So
in this week's episode of the Creative Courage podcast, I am speaking to Simon Forster. He is the founder of Robot Food, who are one of the leading brand agencies in the UK. They have worked with everyone from Pepsi to Cadbury's, Carlsberg and Tuborg. If it's a household food and beverage brand, they've probably worked with them. Today's conversation is interesting because we get into things like how to win bigger corporate clients, why challenging clients and challenging briefs is so important, and why Simon hasn't ever entered an award. If you get value from this episode, which I'm pretty sure you will, please hit that subscribe button and share it with a friend. Simon, you've been running Robot Food for almost 17 years now, and you've worked with, I would say, all of the major food and drink brands from Pepsi to Cadbury's. What do you think you're doing differently that allows you to get these kind of clients and have sustained your business for this amount of years?
Yeah, I think it's not always been that caliber of client. So Robot Food was formed in my dining room. There were just 2 of us and literally picking up the phone and trying to drum up business with, anyone we could in the early days. But I guess as you go, the ambition grows. You start looking around and realizing that some of the work produced by the biggest names isn't necessarily as good as it could be. So the ambition grew from there. When it comes to creativity, there's difficulty as a small business being taken seriously. So to actually end up working with those big global players is quite a step. Everything you do throughout your career is a stepping stone towards a bigger and better job, bigger and better client. It's grown organically over that period.
Yeah. So it wasn't like an overnight success?
No.
Okay. But there are probably a few key things that you've done, because I know a lot of agencies that were running for 10 years and then all of a sudden fell off a cliff, right? And I'm sure you've got people in your network that were once successful but never managed to kind of push past that 10-year mark, right?
Yeah, and I get contacted by agencies that are kind of smaller in profile than us, and and they're asking, how did you get those larger clients? I'm always happy to kind of speak to them and share, but a lot of it really is confidence and kind of clarity. One of the things that I've come to realize as I look back now is what we do isn't all about the creative. Like, the creative is the thing that drives, it's the engine that drives the business. And we've always put a really high emphasis on creative output, but it's how you talk, it's how you deal with those clients, it's how your client team operate. There's so many elements to it. And what those big global players are looking for, they have design functions, and they are switched on to kind of best practice, and they want to deal with agencies that understand some of the complexity of how they operate. Specifically, that's something that is a big learning in kind of understanding a client's point of view and understanding the framework that they operate in within their organization and how to help them get the best results. That's a huge part of what we do. So empathy, understanding and awareness is as with any professional, career, it's one of the most valuable parts of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's such a key point that a lot of people miss. I actually just wrote a whole chapter in my book about this idea that, you know, the creative output and the creative work is only actually a small percentage of the factor in which influences these especially bigger clients, right? So I know you said there's a lot that goes into it, but if you had to kind of break down, if you imagine it like as a pie chart, right? What percentage of that pie chart, let's call the pie chart influence. So the pie chart is going to be made up of all of the things that you think influence a big corporate like Pepsi or Cadbury's decision to hire an agency and to continue working with them. What percentage of that pie chart do you think is made up by the actual creative output?
Probably in the mix, it's actually probably relatively small, but I think it is the thing that is the attraction in the first place. So it is about striking the balance, because there's a lot of big, safe network agencies that these companies can go and work with, but they might not get a bit of that robot food magic. And when they come to us, luckily now we are a safe and understanding pair of hands, but we also are going to sprinkle a little bit of spice on that project that they're looking for from us. And that's, you know, that's the sweet spot, is kind of you're mature, you're good at what you do, you know how to work with large organizations, you don't get frustrated with you know the way they operate. You can help them negotiate the complexity internally, but you can also deliver a little bit of excitement to the brands that you're working with. And yeah, I think we've got that balance right, which is why we punch above our weight. You know, there's only 24 people in our team, and yeah, we're focused on doing really cool creative for big organizations. And I think it comes down to, ultimately, these brands, you know, the bigger the brand, the more they have to preserve, and the scarier it is to appoint an agency, especially if they are highly creative, because it's like, are they safe? Could they go a bit rogue? You know, can I trust them with my brand? That's the question. And when you have evidence of, you know, working with global brands or regional power brands, you know, we rebranded Tuborg in Denmark, and they were already by far the biggest beer brand in Denmark. And Carlsberg appointed us to rebrand that brand. And people I know who live in Copenhagen were like, don't touch it. You know, this is an institution. And we did the work and we improved the brand, and it's resulted in a 6% market share uplift, which, you know, already the biggest brand in a more and more fragmented market where advertising channels are more fragmented, and it's harder to create that awareness. To create that kind of result is massive. So it's less about, you know, what you charge or even how you go about it. It's about you're safe to deliver a result. And that's ultimately what it's all about. We have a good understanding, a good balance between being highly creative but being commercially minded, and that's a thread that runs through everything.
And so what would you say, if we go back to that kind of pie chart, what would you say are the other elements that would be in the mix that make you a safe pair of hands and allow you to have that balance between creativity and security?
The area that's massively grown for us as we've grown as an agency is in our strategy. A lot of agencies talk strategy and employ strategists, but we often hear that there's a massive unalignment with a lot of agencies between their thinking and their creative. And I think we're really joined up. What we do brilliantly at Robot Food is absolutely nail that positioning. So most projects that we work on, we either help refine a brand positioning, or we workshop and create that brand positioning as a starting point. You can do all the research, you can do all the consumer research you want, you can do all the desk research you want, but intuition plays such a large part in that. And I guess we're just good at getting that right. You know, we've got a good barometer of positioning brands exactly where they need to be so that they're distinctive, unique, and have cut through with the intended consumer. And then once that goes into design, that whole process is seamless. So the design output, you're actually, as a consumer, if you see a piece of robot food work, you understand what that creative positioning is, and you understand the idea that sits behind the brand. And that's quite unique.
Yeah, so it's about linking the thinking to the creative and being able to see the thread that runs through that. And I guess also as well, what I've seen a lot just from working with different branding agencies is the ones who have the ability to almost kind of put some boundaries around that thinking. So rather than like, oh, this is Joe, he's our creative strategist and he's come up with this wild idea and it's going to be really cool, we're going to do X, Y, and Z. They're like, actually, we've used this framework. We've asked you what you want this brand to stand for. These typically, based on research, are what colors link with certain metaphors. And you can like it's almost like a science project rather than just like this wild creative idea. You can always link it back to these really important concepts that the client told you that they want, right?
That's how we sell in creative. So after we do a brand positioning, we do a creative strategy. We don't go from a positioning straight into, and here's some concepts, da-da. So it's a very collaborative process with the client that gives them input, it gives them reassurance. And often there's a lot of detail in that, because we'll do a review of current brand equity. We'll really stress test the boundaries of how far the client's comfortable in pushing along the bravery scale. We'll still deliver a scale within that, but there's no point going mild to really wild if the client's only happy between a 4 and a 7 push, for example. So all of that needs to be established, and we'll even look at the detail of neck labels. What's the role of neck labels? What's the role of and do a lot of schematic work in that phase as well. So a lot of the big questions are answered before you get to the sexy creative, and then the creative concept work is really just different fine tunings of what's already been agreed. So when it comes to showing a client concept, they're often like, that's exactly what I was thinking. And it's because they've been part of the journey. So there's no surprises. You can still be creative. It's not that it's watered down and it's not exciting. It's just that they know what to expect. It's nice when you're all aligned.
Yeah. So it's not quite like the Mad Men scene where they're like in a boardroom and they come up with this crazy idea and then they bring it to the client and the client's like, what the fuck is this? And then they like spend the rest of the time trying to get them on board with this idea. It's like more of a collaborative approach.
Yeah, there is. But one thing that we do differently is when we position a brand, the brand positioning is its mission, its values, its purpose. Why does it exist and why should anyone care? But once we establish that, we also bake in a core creative idea that can drive everything for that brand. So I think in the old days, it used to be that you would do a brand positioning maybe in-house or with one brand positioning agency. Then you'd go to a branding company that would work on the logo and the packaging. And then you'd go to a comms agency that would come up with a whole creative strategy of how that brand is going to talk, its key messaging, and what's the hook that you can create advertising from. We like to bake that creative core idea in at the start, because ultimately if we're creating the brand, then why not create it with that creative stickiness built in? And then, we're well placed then to write the tone of voice and increasingly do the comms work for the brand. So I think the lines are becoming blurred, and it is a lot more effective to work with one creative agency as long as they're absolutely nailed on as far as the work that they're producing. Then why would you go to 3 when you could have one and the thinking's more joined up?
Yeah, exactly. I get that. I want to dive into some of these ideas around kind of challenging and the courage to challenge, because I know that's something that we previously spoke about. But let's just go back to that Tuborg example. When you know that there's a legacy brand that lots of people already are familiar with, how do you approach a brief like that? How do you tackle something where there is that maybe fear or concern that you're going to make it worse rather than make it better?
Yeah, luckily, time has told us that we're going to make it better. So, it's always nerve-wracking, especially if there's if it's a much loved brand, especially when you've got people in the local market saying don't touch it. There's a lot of brands we've worked on where people, especially Tuborg, where people have it tattooed on their body. You know, they feel so passionate about it. It's quite a socialist brand. It's quite an important brand for the people of Denmark. So there's a lot to get wrong if you don't get under the skin of it. But that's our job, is to really get under the skin and understand. And really, a lot of those jobs, you know, once you get into the creative strategy and you realize that there's 5 or 6 different master logos in play, a lot of it is just brands evolve over time, and they deal with, you know, maybe multiple creative agencies who all put a spin on as the portfolio of products increase. They get treated in silos, and the brand itself becomes diluted. A lot of what we do, and I kind of see it as the pinnacle of design, it's just having a good barometer and the restraint to just make small changes where the end consumer at the end of the project, they might not even understand what you've changed, but the brand has more impact. And I do see that as kind of the pinnacle of what we do. You know, there's a lot more scope when you deal with a startup and maybe they've launched under a name and it's not got the stickiness they want, and they're like, well, you know, we need a better story, and you come up with a better positioning, you rename the brand, and then you've got full creative license to completely change it because they've not yet got a stronghold in the market. But when you deal with one of those iconic legacy brands and you can make small changes that just improve its imprint, improve people's understanding of what that brand is about.
Can you give an example of kind of how you did that with something like Tuborg?
So a really good example is Brooklyn Brewery. Their brand positioning is here's to difference, because they want to celebrate the diversity of the borough of Brooklyn, and it's kind of they want to see their brand as a representation of the diversity of that amazing part of the city. But their way of executing over time, they kept playing with their own brand assets. They kept diminishing the value of the logo without meaning to. They were just too playful with it. It didn't have enough guardrails in place. So again, by getting different creatives to work on different beer types or whatever, they actually ended up with a range of beers where Brooklyn Lager had a really proud logo that said Brooklyn Lager on it. But then when it came to other SKUs, you had one SKU that said Post Road Pumpkin Ale with a Brooklyn B in the middle. And it's like, well, what's the brand? You know, and they have a partnership with Carlsberg that do their manufacturing and distribution globally. They're trying to launch in new Asian markets, but those are markets that aren't aware of the history. They don't have that brand in their psyche. So to establish that brand in new regions when you're not brand proud is it's a tough ask. So all we did was we took the name of the beer out of the logo, and we created a refined, a new, consistent Brooklyn brewery identity that you can still be fun with it. You can still change its color. You can still change what sits behind it on every individual beer, but at least you have a proud icon that is globally recognizable. And it's a stronger brand for it. But I don't think any consumer, you know, even if you were a massive Brooklyn fan, without looking at before and after side by side, you wouldn't really know what we did.
And that's a good example of where the creative is only a small part of it, right? Because if you focus all your energy on, well, this is the new logo and this is what it's going to look like and this is why it's amazing, you're almost like creating more disruption in the consumer market, because they're like, whoa, what have you done here? What's this? Versus keeping it so subtle that they might not notice the change, but those subtle changes are actually going to have a big impact, like over a longer time horizon.
Commercially, completely. And this is there's a tension there, because as creatives, quite often I think agencies really want to put their stamp on a piece of work, on a rebrand, and it's going to make more of a splash if there is that huge change, because you can create more of a story around it. But for me, the really sexy stuff is taking the long established brand and just tweaking it and making it better.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot of this stuff, the way you talked about at the beginning, kind of approaching things with empathy and humility, and it being a collaborative process and not necessarily having to tweak put your stamp on it. It sounds like a lot of this is really about the courage to kind of leave your ego at the door and really care more about the client and the outcome than you do about your creative work. I don't know if that's the right word, but
I think that you've absolutely nailed it in the fact that we are all about what does this mean for the consumer? Because if we focus purely on that, then the correct outcome commercially will happen for the client, and that's all we care about.
And how do you deal with that as a creative? Because that must be quite hard. I know a lot of creatives get a huge amount of fulfillment from that and maybe some significance from seeing their work out in the world, having that impact. Like, how do you personally and like the lead designers and people on your team approach that? And have you ever had to have any kind of difficult conversations around that?
The hardest one is the fact that we don't enter design awards, or the most obvious kind of version of is the fact that we have no interest in awards, because for me they're all about ego and vanity, and ultimately every single award is a business model in itself, because you have to pay to enter. If you're lucky enough to be shortlisted, you get invited to book a table. It's a machine of commerce. And I think early days we were so bootstrapped. Early days we were operating from secondhand Macs with a secondhand A3 color printer, from my dining room. And in those early days because I didn't have any experience in the industry, I looked around and I looked at the way the business is modeled and the way people go about, obviously awards are a way of attracting client interest, and they're a way of supposedly proving your creativity. But if all of our competitors are talking about being award winning, actually not caring about awards or not seeing the value in them, that actually stands us apart. It gives us a point of view that when you actually drill down into it, it largely came about because Martin, who's one of our creative directors, he was our first ever employee. And he said to me once, why do we not enter design awards? And I said, do you realize you need to pay to enter them? And he was gobsmacked. He was floored by the concept that it costs money, because naively he liked the idea it's purely based on a nicer form of creative judgment.
Yeah, like some kind of school awards day for
totally.
The best pupil or whatever.
But his reaction really cemented my view on it. And I guess we've never had to really kind of sell to the team the reason we don't. There are many reasons we don't, but a lot of it down to time. I know agencies that specifically employ people just to write their award entries and then promote all of that. So it's a machine.
Yeah, absolutely. Can you remember, you talk about like bootstrapping, you said at the beginning that it hasn't always been this way. And obviously just the fact that you've been going for, pretty close to 20 years now is a huge accolade in itself. But can you remember your first kind of pinch me project where you went, oh shit, this is like getting serious now?
The first one was, we really were just doing like odd jobs, working for relatively small kind of businesses that didn't prioritize branding necessarily. So I guess we were a cheap solution for companies that really didn't hold brand in high regard. So we were working for a biscuit manufacturer in Gateshead, and they had the license to produce Jammy Dodgers snack bars for Burton's Biscuits. So I went with their commercial director to present some concepts for Jammy Dodgers snack bars, and the brand manager for Jammy Dodgers loved it. She was like, this is really exciting. It's kind of, it feels like you understand the heart of our brand. And actually at the time, she said, we're going through a rebrand, and we're working with some global agencies on different creative ideas. And she showed me some of the work, and I was like, none of this is your brand. They were so far off the mark as far as trying to appear more healthy or like, but like in doing so, like really kind of just soft and it, not, you know, not where the brand comes from. Ultimately, it comes from a comic strip, Beano, Roger the Dodger type vibes. It has an inherent attitude, and it's about fun, and it's about, you know, those products are never going to be healthy. So it's a treat, and as so, it should be fun. So after I dissed the work by some really big name peers, she said, well, I'll give you a week to show what you would do.
And how did you get your foot in the door with that in the first instance? Because I think a lot of people struggle with that concept where it's like they've already got agencies engaged. Why would they even entertain a conversation with you?
Well, she was at her wit's end, and it was just a chance conversation. So
right, okay. So it was like through the supplier, and she just happened to be there, or?
Yeah, completely. And my bluntness struck a chord, and she gave us a chance, you know. And it was one of those occasions where literally we only showed one concept. It was like, this is what your brand should be. And she was like, I love it. You know, what do I need to pay to keep this work? And she literally left the room for 5 minutes, and I got my iPhone out and I was tapping away trying to work out how many hours we'd spent on it, and massively undersold it as a piece of work.
Yeah, one of the things you said to me when we chatted previously was that as you started to win some of this bigger work with these bigger companies, you started to price things as if you were already a bigger agency.
Yeah, I think that was a tactic. We started working with a large multi-brand. We don't pitch as a rule. We tend not to pitch.
What does that actually mean?
Because of the way we operate, the way we work, there's so much collaborative work with a client in the kind of positioning and the work that goes on pre-creative concept, that when companies ask us to essentially do a beauty parade of, you know, we're getting 6 agencies to show us what they would do with our brand creatively, it generally comes from an unconfident place. It's like, we want to see what you would do, and it's like, well, we just don't get involved.
Yeah, because you don't know what you would do until you've been through that whole process.
Exactly,
right?
And unless you're going to collaborate on the meaningful stuff ahead of the design, then we would be stabbing in the dark anyway. So our chance of winning would be 1 in 6, you know. So we do pitch if it's paid for, and often it's down to politics. So with Tuborg, they had to be seen as a Danish company. They had to be seen to be considering local agencies, and we were one of 3 that they paid to do a pitch. And of course, you're never paid as much as the work that you put in, but there's, at least you're starting the relationship on the right ground, where they're saying, we value your input, and this is an unfortunate process that we need to do for this reason, and everything's up front. So yeah, we're happy to join that process. There's only 3 agencies, and more often than not, we're going to win the work because the thinking's robust, and, you know, you build the rapport.
Nice, I like that. Let's talk a bit about business development, because I know it's a topic that creatives love and hate. They love it because if it means they win more work, then it's great, but they hate it because it often feels like an evil necessity. So if you had everything stripped from you in terms of your portfolio and your reputation, and you had to start from scratch, let's imagine, you know, Robot Food didn't exist and you were starting an agency tomorrow, how do you think you would approach business development?
I don't really know, because, well, the core of what we did early days, we couldn't do today. So we were just really cheeky. Early days, we used to come up with concepts for brands and PR them as if they were real.
Why do you think you couldn't do that now?
I don't know. Maybe it's just my outlook. Maybe you could. If you're a startup, you probably have the balls to do it. But you know, we were writing press releases for a new wine brand from the Mendoza region of Argentina, like whatever, and it would get published. And I remember having conversations with design leaders within organizations where they would be like, "Oh yeah, you sent us a bottle of that wine," and I'm like, "Did we?" Like, it never existed. But
right,
I'm a believer in kind of, I don't know, you say it and then you make it happen. And it does work like that. We were a strategic agency before we knew what strategy was. And then we sold our strategy, and then we were like, how the hell do we do this?
Yeah, which I think is like such an important mindset. And I think a lot of people really struggle with that. I've heard, I've read books by people like Richard Branson and, the old school entrepreneurs. And I think one of the common themes is you pitch your ideas into existence, right? If you say it enough, if you talk to enough people, eventually there will be a door that opens that will present you with that opportunity.
Completely.
And if you get a yes, then you figure out how to make it work, right? Whereas I think a lot of creatives that I coach definitely are stuck in this mindset of, but what if this, and what if I do that and that happens? And they want it all figured out before they go and ask somebody for something.
Yeah, but then you're the eternal student, and you would never have the confidence to actually start. That's the risk. You're never gonna have full security. But luckily, through my career pre robot food, I've always been somebody who just comes up with an idea for a business and creates the business. So, before robot food, I was running brands within surf and snowboard and kind of lifestyle because I enjoyed it. And then it was only kind of the implosion of that industry it got too big. It got too big for the amount of consumers in it. So I just took a backward step, and I was like, what do I really want to do? And I knew I wanted to do something creative, but I hadn't any experience. I'd never been into a creative agency, but it didn't stop me. And in the same way, in my late 30s, I started a health and beauty brand. And what right do I have to start a health and beauty brand?
Yeah, and just tell me like how you think about that, because I listen to a lot of people talking about these things, but I know we all have this kind of internal dialogue that goes on, right? The little voice in our head. Like when you say, who am I to start a beauty brand? Or I just started this thing because it was creative. Do you still get the doubts and the fears that come up, or are they just like not present?
I get the doubts and the fears, but they're the driver. I think I'm lucky in the fact that I started my first business at 21 and literally went out and took out two unsecured personal loans, and I went and bought a car and a computer, and I just started my business. I just started selling clothing. And I guess I did that because my mum was similar. She was a dancer, and then she was an interior designer, and then she was a hotelier, and she did the cooking, and it was the best restaurant in Harrogate at the time. So I always knew that if you put your mind to it, like you're going to learn to be the best. And time's a funny thing. When you're young, you kind of like, when I reach this age, I want to have achieved this. When you set yourself really kind of quite short-term goals, but you have all the time in the world to become amazing at whatever you want to apply yourself to. And kind of, this is the case with robot food. I think my original aim was to convert my garage and employ an art worker, and we'd be a team of 3. That was the goal. And then very soon afterwards, I'm looking at the work outputted from some of the biggest names in the industry, thinking we could do better than that.
And so is it something that happened in your childhood, do you think, that gave you that level of confidence?
It's probably seeing my mum's example and understanding. I think we're in the UK, we've always been quite reserved. We're like, this fear of failure, and the fear of failure is so crippling for people that they want to have absolute confidence before embarking on any business activity that it's going to succeed. Well, you can't. There's so many factors. It's not just your ability. It's market unpredictability, stickiness of idea. There's so many different things that come into play. But, a lot of it is just common sense. Common sense is a driver within robot food. But then, when I started Stories and Ink, it's like it all came about because in robot food, we hadn't worked in health and beauty. So we looked at the skincare category and we were like, what is the distinguishing difference between Nivea, Dove, L'Oreal? Like they all seem to be very similar brands owned by similar corporations targeting a similar consumer. And I was really motivated by a statistic that I read that 40% of the Western world are tattooed. So I was like, so why not create a brand that's specifically for just the 40%? Then surely it's going to resonate really strongly with those people.
And that's where most people would have stopped, though. That's the thing that I'm fascinated with. Like, how do you get over that line? Because I'm sure we've all seen things like that. And as creatives, I'm sure you're the same. Have 100 ideas a week, right? Oh, wouldn't this be cool? Wouldn't that be cool? So how do you go from, that would be really cool, to, oh, I'm actually doing this? Specifically
with that, we didn't do much with it. It was just in our portfolio in the hope that, you know, we would win some work with L'Oreal or whatever. And it was actually a potential client that came to us, and he had a shower care brand. It was pretty awful. It was called Wingman. It was like toxic masculinity bottled. They did like petrol scented shower gel and stuff like that. And Stu had been doing this for years, about 6 or 7 years, and he was like, you know, what do you think I should do with the brand? And I was literally like, I think you should give it up.
Wow.
I think you've run your course. You've burnt through a lot of investment, and you've done extremely well, but there's going to be some learnings in this that you could take elsewhere, and this isn't your thing. And luckily, rather than just be offended, he was like, he's quite an excitable, you know, motivated guy. And he was like, what are you doing with this idea in your portfolio? And I was like, nothing. And he was like, right, I'm going to sell it into Superdrug.
So this is kind of another great example of like pitching something into existence, right? It was like, I had this idea, but instead of it just staying an idea, I at least put out version 1 and it lived here.
And then iterate. Yeah. And he literally sold it into Superdrug and then phoned me and was like, I need you to invest in it to make it happen. And I was on the phone with him for quite some time, drinking a lot of a bottle of rum at the time. And literally, it just came down to gut feel of, not even size of opportunity. I think with that, it was, do I believe in this guy? And, you know, Stu's good kind of 8 years younger than me, so motivated, hasn't yet had huge success. So I'm like, yeah, I can see this guy working hard and making it happen. And, you know, I'm not involved in the day-to-day, but I'm like an advisor with that business. And we've made endless mistakes, but that's what you learn from. And that's what creates the opportunity. It's really what I've learned is business success is about resilience and staying power. If you're in it long enough, you will succeed because those around you will see that you're not shifting. You mean it, you know, and, you know, at some point, we're going to sell that business for tens of millions and everyone's going to say it's an overnight success. But what they don't know is in the beginning, you know, I put in well over £100,000 of my own money when I couldn't really afford it.
So to me, that's courage, because there's so much unknown there. Like, what would have happened if that didn't work and you just lost your money? Like, how do you think about failure and risk?
I've had failures. I've invested in something else where I lost all the money. But, you know, if you didn't take risk, you wouldn't have the chance. It's balanced though, isn't it? You wouldn't have the chance of brilliant success. But at the same time, I've got friends who have heard that some new precious metal is worth investing in, and they've put hundreds of thousands into it where they can't really afford to lose it and they've lost it. So it's all about balancing that risk with, if you can have an effect in it, then there's more chance of success, isn't there? So that's why starting an agency or starting Stories in Ink, that they were exciting to me because I can help make them succeed.
Yeah. It's like it was worth the risk because you knew that even if it failed, it was going to be exciting and fun. Whereas like putting your money into like some random fund, you're just hoping for a return, right? There's not going to be a story there. There's not going to be any experience. There's not going to be any learning. So It's a bit like, I think I heard someone say the other day, it was someone like Hormozy, and he said, you know, like pick the option that's going to give you the best story.
Yeah.
not just like the option that you're most confident is going to give you the thing that you want.
Yeah, completely. Because it's never about it's not about the financial reward. The success comes from seeing the success, seeing the uptake of, and eventually, hopefully selling that brand.
Yeah. The one thing we haven't spoken about is, has it always been robot food? As in, was that always your niche from the beginning, food and drink?
Yeah, the name robot food isn't connected to food. I think the direction at the beginning was to target food and drink brands because, fast moving consumer goods, it's where a lot of investment happens. So it seemed like an obvious place to start. It is good to have a niche, to be a specialist, but it's interesting because although I would always advise clients don't try and appeal to everyone, but now our processes and our thinking they're completely transferable. So, a couple of years ago, we were contacted by a Leeds-based but national debt charity, and it's such a complex organization. It's such a complex idea because they have two target markets. They have people who are spiraling out of control in debt, and they have the banks that recommend them as a service. So it's quite a complex brand to communicate. And they asked us to pitch, and we actually agreed because we wanted to diversify and we wanted to see if we could do something that was completely out of our comfort zone. And really it was more of an advertising piece. The agencies we were pitching against were famous advertising agencies, and they wanted to remove the stigma of contacting their service. So our thinking was purely around, if you have a mortgage, you have debt. Simple as that. So pretty much all of us carry debt. So our starting point was debt happens, let's deal with it. Which is a completely different look and feel to, their brand previous to that was their photography was like, they were almost like police mugshots. It felt like it was coming from a place of shame and it would be a last resort that you'd actually pick up the phone and want to use the service because it felt scary. So, the simplicity of thinking is what won us that project, and it's completely outside of our comfort zone, but we delivered, we smashed it. I think we would in every area because we're unafraid to give it a go and to be pure in our thinking.
Yeah. And I think that's kind of the message of our conversation today, is this idea of like leading with that courage, not only in terms of kind of failure and potential downside, but also in terms of your projects and not being afraid to take on these challenges where you might disrupt something or you might do something that doesn't have the outcome that people expect, because it sounds like the way that you're able to have that level of confidence is by having such a kind of methodical process when it comes to creating that outcome. It's not just I'm flipping a coin and I'm kind of taking this risk. It's like, actually, we know through our experience and trial and error and all of these things, we know that our process is going to mean that we're pretty much guaranteed to get a positive outcome.
Yeah, the process means we're not going to get derailed. But I think more importantly than that is confidence in your own, we are, as creatives and as strategists, we are cultural barometers. And there's also confidence that we have a really good understanding. And that's where I talk about the positioning. There's so many different ways that you could position a brand. And we see it all the time where brands come to us and they'd say, well, we've just been working with an agency and we have this brand positioning. And, and you're like, really? There's nothing distinctive in here. Like, it seems, I can imagine it was very easy to sell in because it's very safe, but there is nothing sticky. So, and we'll always be honest and be like, you should probably start again. And luckily we're in a position where, probably because of our time doing what we're doing and some of the case studies that we've built, people trust us. So they know it's not coming from a place of, I don't know, we're not trying to upset them, and the work that they've had done is a waste of time. They believe it, and they're probably thinking it, but once you tell them, it then gives them the confidence that, yeah, we kind of knew it, and we'd like your help. We had it recently where a brand came to us and they said, we've been working with an agency for months and months on our positioning, and we were very careful in. They said we want an agency to help our internal design team to design the next version of our brand, and we want to turn it around quite quickly, and and we were very careful in saying, here's our proposal. The scope's a bit bigger than what you've suggested, because we're just concerned that the starting point here isn't robust enough. And they knew it.
Yeah. And so it's like about, again, having the courage to be honest with someone and say what you think, right?
That's the biggest learn. That's the biggest kind of area in which we've developed as an agency, is that kind of, understanding who your ideal clients are and understanding more importantly, who they aren't. So, you often get asked, what would be your ideal brand to work on? Well, we once got contacted by our ideal brand, and they said, we'd like you to show us, we've got a new brand positioning. We'd like you to show us what that means for every single range of products within our brand portfolio. And we want you to do it in 2 weeks, and there's a $7,000 budget. And we were like, that's 3 months worth of work, and the budget would need to be at least 10 times to even consider embarking on that huge body of work. And I suggested, this is pretty much, you want the whole project delivering in 2 weeks as a pitch. And they said, well, we don't want the artwork. And it's just very telling, that my idea of potentially getting the opportunity to work with this brand was, the actual reality was not great. We bowed out. They said, well, we have some global agencies that are quite prepared to do it, and we wish them luck. And then years later, that nothing had happened because, the spidey senses were right.
It's been an incredible conversation. I think there might be a call for part 2. I will always ask the listeners, if you want part 2, let us know in the comments. Where can people find out more about you, and where can people connect with you?
Find out about Robot Food on our website, robot-food.com. And I'm quite active on LinkedIn. So, it's a good place to kind of start conversation. I'm always keen to grow my network, have conversation, help others. That's a growing focus as we get older. We don't mind giving back. So
yeah, absolutely, man. Well, you've done that today, so thank you so much for your time and your wisdom and sharing that with us. And we'll put a call out for part 2.
Cool. Thanks so much for inviting me on, Matt. It's been fun.